The wine glass shattered against the marble floor 3 inches from his boot. "How dare you!" Eleanor Ashford hissed, her chest heaving beneath the emerald silk of her gown, her face flushed with fury that made her beautiful in a way that sobered every man in the ballroom. "How dare you approach me as if you were my equal?" The orchestra had stopped. 200 faces turned toward the center of the Ashford Estates grand ballroom, where Eleanor stood like an avenging angel, her hand still extended from hurling her drink, her eyes blazing at the man before her. He stood perfectly still. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black evening clothes that were well made, but not ostentatious. No jewels, no insignia. His dark hair was slightly too long, brushing his collar. His face was angular, hard, with eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless in the candlelight. He hadn't flinched when the glass exploded at his feet. He didn't flinch now. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, his voice low and measured, "I merely asked you to dance." "You merely—" Eleanor's laugh was sharp, cutting. "You walk into my home, uninvited, unnamed, looking like some tradesman in borrowed clothes, and you think you can put your hands on me? Think you can touch the daughter of Lord Ashford as if you were a gentleman?" Whispers erupted around them. Eleanor's father would be furious at the scene, but she didn't care. This man had approached her with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he thought himself worthy of her attention. He'd walked through her father's ballroom, as if he belonged there, as if he had every right to be among the nobility celebrating her 20th birthday. But she'd seen the truth immediately. No family crest on his cufflinks, no signet ring, no retinue of servants or companions marking his status. Just a lone man who'd somehow slipped past the footmen and had the audacity to bow before her and extend his hand. "I apologize for the intrusion," the man said, and something in his tone made Eleanor's skin prickle. He wasn't apologizing. The words were correct, but there was something underneath them, something dark and patient. "I was under the impression all gentlemen were welcome at the Ashford ball." "Gentlemen," Eleanor repeated, taking a step toward him. She was aware of her mother's gasp somewhere behind her, her father's heavy footsteps approaching. But momentum had seized her now. Righteous fury at this, nobody who dared to look at her with those cold, pale eyes as if he saw something that amused him. "That word has a meaning, sir. It requires birth, breeding, blood that matters, not whatever muddy lineage produced you." She watched for the impact of her words, waited for him to redden with shame or anger, to stammer an excuse, to retreat like the inferior creature he was. Instead, his mouth curved, just barely, the ghost of a smile that never reached his eyes. "I see," he said softly. "Eleanor." Her father had reached them now, Lord Ashford red-faced and sweating despite the cool spring evening. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this?" "This man," Eleanor said, not taking her eyes from the stranger's face, "entered our home and insulted us with his presence. I want him removed." "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," the stranger said, turning to address her father with a slight bow, so slight it bordered on disrespectful. "I received an invitation to celebrate your daughter's birthday. I came to offer my congratulations." "You received?" Lord Ashford's face went from red to purple. "I don't know who you are, sir, but—" "My name," the stranger interrupted quietly, "is Adrian." He offered no surname, no title, nothing that would place him in society's carefully maintained hierarchy. Lord Ashford sputtered. "Security! Remove this man immediately!" 2 footmen approached, large men accustomed to handling troublemakers. The stranger, Adrian, glanced at them with that same faint, humorless smile. "Of course," he said. Then his eyes returned to Eleanor, and she felt something cold slide down her spine. "Miss Ashford, I hope you remember this evening. I suspect I will." There was something in the way he said it, a promise, a threat. Eleanor couldn't tell which. "I'll remember throwing you out like the beggar you are," she said, lifting her chin. "Now go, before my father has you arrested for trespassing." He held her gaze for 1 more second. 2. Long enough that Eleanor felt her breath catch, felt something shift in the air between them, something dangerous that she didn't understand. Then he turned and walked toward the ballroom's entrance, the footmen following uselessly behind him. He moved like a man who was leaving by choice, not compulsion. The crowd parted before him, nobles and their children drawing back instinctively from this unknown quantity in their midst. Eleanor watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrenaline sang through her veins. She'd won. She defended her family's honor, protected their reputation from contamination by some mysterious interloper who thought he could simply appear among his betters. "Eleanor?" her mother breathed, appearing at her side with a handkerchief to press against Eleanor's flushed cheeks. "What a terrible ordeal. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mother." Eleanor turned away from the doorway where the stranger had disappeared. "Better than fine. That creature needed to be taught his place. Indeed. Her mother's voice was shrill with residual anxiety. To think he simply walked in off the street. Your father will have words with the staff. This is unacceptable. The orchestra began playing again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Conversations resumed. Eleanor's friends clustered around her, exclaiming over her bravery, her quick thinking, her devastating put-downs. You were magnificent, Lady Charlotte breathed, clutching Eleanor's arm. The way you threw that wine, and your words. Oh, Eleanor, you absolutely destroyed him. He deserved worse, Eleanor said. But even as she spoke, she found her eyes drifting back to the doorway. Something nagged at her. That smile. Those eyes. The absolute lack of fear in his bearing. Who was he? Come, her father said gruffly, taking her elbow. We should return to the receiving line. And Eleanor, perhaps less drama for the remainder of the evening? Of course, father. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd missed something. Something important. 3 days later, Eleanor was shopping on Bond Street when she saw him again. She was examining a bolt of French silk in Madame Laurent's dress shop, her maid trailing behind her with arms full of purchases, when movement in the street caught her eye. Adrian. He was walking past the shop window, dressed in riding clothes this time. Still dark, still plain, but well made. A horse followed him, a magnificent black stallion that must have cost more than most men earned in a year. He wasn't looking at the shop, wasn't looking for her. But Eleanor's breath caught anyway. Miss Eleanor? Her maid prompted. The green or the blue? Neither, Eleanor said sharply, setting down the silk. We're leaving. She swept out of the shop before Madame Laurent could protest, her maid scrambling to keep up. Outside, the spring sun was bright and warm, the street crowded with carriages and pedestrians. Eleanor looked left, then right. There. He was walking toward the park, the stallion's reins loose in his hand. Eleanor followed. She told herself she was merely curious. Told herself she had every right to know who this man was, where he'd come from, what business he had appearing at her birthday celebration and then haunting her neighborhood like some specter. But as she hurried after him, maintaining a careful distance, her heart beat faster than curiosity alone could explain. Adrian turned down a quieter street, then another. The crowds thinned. Eleanor's maid made worried noises behind her, but Eleanor ignored them. She was the daughter of Lord Ashford. She was untouchable. What did she have to fear from some base-born interloper? Then Adrian stopped. He stood beside a small park, hardly more than a garden really, with iron gates and a handful of benches. He tied his horse to the fence and turned. He was looking directly at her. Eleanor froze, her face flooding with heat. He'd known. The entire time he'd known she was following him. Adrian's expression didn't change. He simply watched her, waiting, his pale eyes unreadable in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. Eleanor lifted her chin and walked toward him. She refused to be intimidated, refused to show weakness before this man who'd already seen her lose her composure once. Following me, Miss Ashford? Adrian asked as she approached. His tone was mild, conversational. How unexpected. I want to know who you are, Eleanor demanded, stopping a few feet away. Her maid hung back, wringing her hands. I want to know why you came to my party and what you want from my family. I told you my name. Your Christian name means nothing. What's your family? Your occupation? Your purpose? Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying her. Why does it matter? You made your opinion of me quite clear 3 nights ago. I'm a nobody, a beggar, unworthy of your notice. Eleanor's jaw tightened. And yet here you are, in my neighborhood, on my streets, as if you belong here. These are public streets, Miss Ashford. Nothing is public to people like us. Everything has rules, boundaries. You've crossed them, and I want to know why. For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed Adrian's face. His mouth curved in that same faint smile. But this time, there was heat behind it. Anger, perhaps, or something more dangerous. People like us, he repeated softly. Tell me, Miss Ashford, what makes you so certain we're different? Everything, Eleanor said immediately. Birth, blood, station. I am Lord Ashford's daughter. You are nothing. No one. I see. Adrian took a step toward her, and Eleanor instinctively stepped back. He noticed, and something flickered in his expression. Satisfaction, perhaps. And this certainty of yours, this conviction that you know exactly who and what I am, does it come naturally, or is it taught? It's truth, Eleanor snapped. It's the order of things. Some people are born to rule, and some are born to serve. That's how society functions. And you, Adrian said quietly, were born to rule. Yes. How fortunate for you. There was something in his tone that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. Not quite mockery, Not quite threat. Something else entirely. This conversation is pointless, she said, turning away. Stay away from me and my family, Mr. Adrian. Whatever game you're playing, it won't work. I'm not playing a game. Eleanor looked back at him over her shoulder. Then what are you doing? Adrian held her gaze, and for one long moment, Eleanor saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Something ancient and patient and utterly implacable. Waiting, he said simply. For what? His smile widened. Just a fraction. For you to understand. Eleanor wanted to snap back, to put him in his place with another cutting remark. But something about the way he looked at her, the absolute certainty in his bearing, stole the words from her throat. She turned and walked away quickly, her maid hurrying to catch up. She didn't look back. Didn't dare. But she could feel his eyes on her all the way to the corner. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, replaying both encounters with Adrian in her mind. His composure, his confidence, the way he looked at her as if he knew something she didn't. Waiting, he'd said, for you to understand. Understand what? Eleanor threw off her covers and moved to the window. The Ashford Estates grounds were dark and peaceful, the moon hanging low over the gardens. Somewhere out there, London slept. And somewhere in that vast city was a man named Adrian who'd invaded her thoughts like a splinter she couldn't dig out. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, trying to calm the restless energy coursing through her. A knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother or a maid. It was her father. Lord Ashford stood in the doorway, his face grave, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked older than Eleanor remembered, the lines around his mouth deeper. "Eleanor," he said, "we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" Her father entered the room, closing the door behind him. He moved to her writing desk and sat heavily, suddenly looking exhausted. "Father?" Eleanor prompted, moving toward him. "What's happened?" Lord Ashford was silent for a long moment. Then, "I've made a terrible mistake." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "That man," her father said quietly. "The one from your birthday. Adrian. What about him?" Her father looked up at her, and Eleanor saw something she'd never seen before in her father's eyes. Fear. "I know who he is," Lord Ashford whispered. "And God help us, Eleanor. God help us both." Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. "Tell me." But her father shook his head, standing abruptly. "In the morning. I'll tell you everything in the morning. But Eleanor," he gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in with desperate strength. "Whatever happens, you must remember that I did what I thought was best for our family. Do you understand?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "No, I don't understand anything. Who is he? Why are you so frightened?" "In the morning," her father repeated, and there was something broken in his voice. Something defeated. He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor stood frozen in the center of her bedroom, her mind racing. Her father was afraid. Lord Ashford, who commanded rooms with his presence, who negotiated with ministers and princes, who'd never shown weakness in his life, he was afraid of Adrian. But why? Who was he? Eleanor moved back to the window, staring out at the darkness, and for the first time since Adrian had appeared in her life, she felt something cold and terrible bloom in her chest. Not anger, not indignation, fear. "Waiting," Adrian had said, "for you to understand." Eleanor pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. What had she done? Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat by her window through the night, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Every interaction with Adrian replayed itself, but now the details looked different. His clothes, plain, yes, but the cut had been perfect, the fabric expensive. His bearing, not the false confidence of a social climber, but the natural authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to stand anywhere he chose. The horse, that magnificent stallion worth a fortune, waiting for you to understand. When dawn finally broke, Eleanor rang for her maid and dressed mechanically, choosing a simple morning gown without thinking. Her hands trembled as she fastened her earrings. Her father would explain everything. He'd tell her who Adrian was, why he'd come, what he wanted, and then this sick feeling in her stomach would resolve itself into something she could manage. She descended the stairs to find the household in chaos. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying trunks and cases. Her mother stood in the entrance hall, pale and tear-stained, directing the packing with sharp, desperate gestures. Two men Eleanor didn't recognize stood by the door, lawyers, by their severe dress and leather cases. "Mother?" Eleanor stopped on the landing. "What's happening?" Lady Ashford looked up, and Eleanor had never seen such devastation in her mother's face. "Eleanor! Oh, my darling girl! Where's father?" "In his study." Her mother's voice broke. With the Duke's representatives. The Duke's representative. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her feet. What Duke? But her mother had turned away, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eleanor ran. She flew down the corridor to her father's study, her slippers sliding on the polished floor. The door was closed, but not locked. She burst through it without knocking. Her father stood behind his desk, his face gray as ash. Two more men in expensive suits stood before him. Not lawyers these, but something else, something harder. Men who looked like they could kill as easily as negotiate. And seated in her father's own chair, calm and composed, as if he owned the room, was Adrian. He looked different in daylight streaming through the windows. Not different in appearance. He wore the same dark, well-made clothes, the same expressionless mask. But the context had changed. Now seeing him in her father's study, in her father's chair, with her father standing like a supplicant before him, everything clicked into a horrifying new focus. Eleanor, her father said hoarsely, you shouldn't be here. I want to know what's happening. Eleanor's voice came out stronger than she felt. She looked at Adrian, trying to read his face. I want to know who you are. Adrian stood slowly, and the movement had a grace to it that made Eleanor's breath catch. He'd been hiding it before, hiding the way he moved, the unconscious elegance of someone trained from birth in deportment and power. My name, he said quietly, is Adrian Blackwell, Duke of Thornfield, Lord of the Northern Territories, Keeper of the King's Justice for the border counties. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt the words hit her like physical blows. Duke, not a tradesman, not a social climber, not some ambitious merchant's son trying to ingratiate himself with his betters. A duke, her father's equal at least, his superior in wealth and territory if the northern holdings were as vast as rumor suggested. No, Eleanor whispered. No, that's not. You wore no insignia, no crest, nothing that would identify. I wore exactly what I chose to wear, Adrian said, his pale eyes fixed on hers with that same patient intensity she'd mistaken for presumption. I wanted to see how the celebrated Ashford family would treat a man they believed beneath them. How you would treat such a man, Miss Ashford. The room spun. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. This is some kind of trick, some game. Show her, Adrian said, not taking his eyes from Eleanor's face. One of the men stepped forward and handed Eleanor a document, heavy paper, official seals. She scanned it with shaking hands, her vision blurring, but the words were clear enough. Royal warrant, Northern Territories, His Grace Adrian Blackwell, Duke of Thornfield, authority of the Crown. Eleanor looked up at her father. Tell me this is a forgery. Lord Ashford closed his eyes. It's real, Eleanor. Then why didn't you recognize him? Why didn't you— I've never seen him, her father said dully. The Duke of Thornfield is notoriously private. He rarely comes to London. No one knows what he looks like except his own people. He opened his eyes, and the defeat in them made Eleanor want to scream. He could walk through any ballroom in England, and no one would know him. So he came to our house, Eleanor said, her voice rising, disguised as a commoner. To what? Spy on us? Mock us? To test you, Adrian said simply. And you failed. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. Failed? Your father, Adrian continued in that same measured tone, approached me 6 months ago with a business proposal. He wanted to merge the Ashford shipping interests with my northern trade routes. It would have made both our families wealthier, more powerful. He suggested, as part of the arrangement, a marriage alliance. The world stopped. No, Eleanor. A marriage, Adrian went on, between myself and his daughter, the celebrated Eleanor Ashford, beautiful, accomplished, perfect in every way. His mouth curved in that faint, terrible smile. I told your father I would need to meet you first, to see what kind of woman you were. He agreed. Eleanor looked at her father, silently begging him to deny it, but Lord Ashford just stood there, broken and silent. So, I came to your birthday celebration, Adrian said. Unannounced, unknown, just a man in plain clothes, asking you to dance, treating you as an equal, as I would have treated any woman I was considering as my wife. And Eleanor's voice cracked. I threw wine at you. You did more than that. Adrian took a step toward her, and Eleanor stumbled back. You called me a beggar, mud-blooded, unworthy of touching you. You had me thrown from your house like a criminal. Another step. You humiliated me in front of 200 witnesses because you believed I was beneath you. I didn't know exactly. Adrian's voice hardened, the first real anger bleeding through his composure. You didn't know. And because you didn't know, you felt entitled to treat me like refuse, to degrade me, to use words that would destroy a man's reputation, his livelihood, his entire life, because you believed you had the power to do so without consequence. Eleanor pressed her back against the wall, tears burning her eyes. I'm sorry. I thought— You thought I was no one, Adrian interrupted, and therefore I didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. My dignity didn't matter. Nothing about me mattered because I lacked the proper bloodlines, the proper name, the proper place in your precious hierarchy. Your Grace, Lord Ashford said desperately, please. She's young. She made a mistake. A mistake? Adrian turned his pale gaze on her father, and Lord Ashford flinched. Is that what you call it? Your daughter revealed exactly who she is, Lord Ashford. She showed me her true character, and now both of you will live with the consequences. What consequences? Eleanor forced the words through her tight throat. What are you going to do? Adrian returned his attention to her, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not rage, not even satisfaction, just that same patient, implacable certainty. I'm going to marry you, he said simply. Eleanor's knees buckled. No. Yes. You can't. I won't. Your father owes me 50,000 pounds, Adrian said, his voice flat and businesslike now. Money he borrowed from my banks to finance his shipping ventures. Money he cannot repay. The note came due yesterday. Lord Ashford made a choked sound. I could destroy your family, Adrian continued, speaking directly to Eleanor now. I could take this estate, your father's ships, everything the Ashford name represents. I could reduce you from nobility to poverty in a matter of weeks. Then do it, Eleanor spat, finding her anger again, clinging to it like a lifeline. Do it and be done with us! Or, Adrian said, you could marry me, fulfill the arrangement your father proposed, and I will forgive the debt, protect the Ashford interests, and ensure your family maintains their position in society. You can't force me to marry you. I'll refuse. You'll what? Adrian tilted his head, genuinely curious. Run away? Where? You're a woman of noble birth, with no money, no skills, no ability to survive alone. Hide? I own half the properties in England through various investments. Fight me in court? He smiled then, cold and sharp. I have the king's ear, Miss Ashford. What do you have? Eleanor wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, to attack him physically, to do anything that would wipe that calm certainty from his face. But she had nothing. No power. No options. No escape. Why? She whispered. If I treated you so terribly, why would you want to marry me? Want? Adrian's laugh was brief and humorless. This isn't about wanting. This is about teaching you a lesson you'll never forget. He moved closer, and Eleanor couldn't retreat any further. He stopped inches from her, so close she could see the exact shade of his eyes. Not colorless after all, but the palest gray, like winter ice. You will marry me, Adrian said softly. You will stand before a priest and vow to honor and obey me. You will wear my ring, bear my name, live in my house, and every single day for the rest of your life, you will remember the moment you threw wine at my feet. You will remember calling me unworthy. You will remember the contempt in your eyes when you looked at me. This is madness, Eleanor breathed. This is justice. Adrian reached out and caught her chin, tilting her face up to his. His touch was gentle, which somehow made it worse. You wanted to know your place in the hierarchy, Miss Ashford. Allow me to teach you. You are about to become the Duchess of Thornfield, one of the most powerful women in England, and you will spend every moment of that elevated position knowing that you earned it by being exactly the kind of person you claim to despise. Small, cruel, and pathetically obsessed with meaningless differences in birth. Eleanor jerked away from his touch, tears streaming down her face now. I hate you. Good, Adrian said. Perhaps that will make this easier. He turned to Lord Ashford. The ceremony will take place in 3 days. My people will handle the arrangements. Miss Ashford will need to pack her belongings. She'll be leaving for the northern estate immediately after the wedding. 3 days? Eleanor's mother had appeared in the doorway, her face white. Your Grace, surely we could have more time. 3 days, Adrian repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Or the debt comes due in full tomorrow morning. He looked between Eleanor's parents, his expression carved from stone. Choose. Lord Ashford's shoulders sagged. 3 days. Father, no! Eleanor grabbed his arm. Don't do this. Don't sell me to this monster. Monster? Adrian's voice cut across her protest. I asked you to dance, Miss Ashford. You threw wine at me. You called me mud-blooded and had me ejected from your home like a criminal. Which of us is the monster? Eleanor had no answer. Her father pulled away from her grip, unable to meet her eyes. The contracts will be drawn up by tonight, one of Adrian's men said, stepping forward with a leather case. Lord Ashford, if you'll sign— No. Eleanor stepped between her father and the contracts. No, I'll do it. Everyone stopped. Eleanor turned to face Adrian, drawing herself up to her full height. She was still crying, but she forced steel into her voice. "But not to save my father's fortune. Not because you're blackmailing us." "Then why?" Adrian asked, something flickering in his expression for the first time. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "Because I was wrong," Eleanor said, each word tasting like ash. "I was cruel and small and everything you said I was. I judged you without knowing you. I treated you as less than human because I thought I had the right to do so." She took a shaking breath. "So I'll marry you, and I'll accept whatever punishment you think I deserve. But my family goes free. Completely. No debt. No obligations. No hold over them ever again." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Eleanor held his gaze, refusing to look away even though everything in her wanted to collapse and sob. "Very well," Adrian said finally. "Agreed." He gestured to his men, who began laying out documents on her father's desk. Eleanor watched, numb, as her future was signed away with scratches of ink and presses of seals. 3 days, Adrian said again, the door. He paused beside Eleanor, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Pack warm. The north is cold this time of year, and we'll be staying there for quite some time." "How long?" Eleanor asked hollowly. Adrian's smile returned, sharp as a blade. "Forever, Your Grace. That's rather the point of marriage." He left without another word, his men following like shadows. The door closed behind them, and Eleanor heard their footsteps receding down the corridor, heard the front door open and close, heard hoofbeats on the drive as they rode away. Then the silence was broken by her mother's wail. Eleanor stood frozen in the center of the study while her mother collapsed into sobs and her father sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Around her, the ruins of her life settled like dust after an explosion. 3 days. She had 3 days before she became the Duchess of Thornfield. 3 days before she left everything she'd ever known. 3 days before she entered a marriage designed not as a partnership but as a punishment. Eleanor walked to the window and looked out at the garden she'd played in as a child, at the ground she'd run through as a girl, at the life she'd taken for granted, the power, the privilege, the absolute certainty that she was special, chosen, better than others simply by accident of birth. "You will remember," Adrian had said, "every single day." Eleanor pressed her palm against the glass, the same gesture she'd made the night before, when she'd been ignorant and free. Now she understood what he'd been waiting for. Not forgiveness, not contrition, not even love. He'd been waiting for this moment, when she finally realized what she'd done and who she'd done it to, when the full weight of her actions crashed down on her and crushed every certainty she'd ever held about her place in the world. He'd been waiting for her to understand that power was never about blood or birth. It was about who held the cards, who controlled the money, who could destroy you with a word and rebuild you according to their design. Eleanor had thought herself powerful because of her name. Adrian had shown her what real power looked like, and in 3 days she would belong to him completely. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the tears come, knowing that no one was coming to save her, that there was no escape, no rescue, no magical solution that would undo what she'd done. She had publicly rejected a duke, believing him to be no one. Now he would claim her, and she would spend the rest of her life learning exactly what that meant. Behind her, her parents wept for their daughter and their family, and the future they'd lost to pride and debt, and a single moment of careless cruelty. But Eleanor didn't cry for any of those things. She cried because somewhere deep inside, underneath the fear and horror and desperate regret, a small voice whispered that she deserved this. Every bit of it. And Adrian Blackwell, Duke of Thornfield, had known it from the moment their eyes first met. He'd known she would reject him. Expected it even, because that's exactly what someone like her, someone raised to believe birth made them superior, would do when confronted with an apparent inferior. He'd set a trap, and she'd walked into it with her eyes wide open. Now the trap had closed. There's no escape. The morning sun climbed higher outside the window, indifferent to the destruction of Eleanor Ashford's world. In 3 days, the sun would rise on her wedding, on her new life as the Duchess of Thornfield, on an existence shaped entirely by the man she'd once called mud-blooded and unworthy. He would claim her. He already had. Eleanor finally understood. It was far, far too late.